Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am here with Ed. I'm Lyndsay, and we are joined for another week with Bridget Stevens. So welcome back, Bridget.
Thanks.
Yeah. You're like, did you really have to hold me here against my will and strap me into this chair?
There's a second part.
Yeah. She says thanks with a question mark. So we are continuing the conversation that we were having last week. If you missed last week, there is some context there. So we were talking about boards. Bridget was on the Messiah Church board for a couple of years, and then she has now moved into staff, which makes her ineligible to be on both staff and board.
Yes.
So she has seen both sides of just like attending church to being on the board and decision-making roles to now being on staff. So it's really valuable having your insight here and just you being a part of this conversation today and last week. So as we ended the podcast, we were talking about like kind of, I guess, like what makes a good candidate for a board, like how you should be on the board, whether to be discouraging, how that impacts the pastor, what is discernment in that process. So I guess we're going to jump back into that conversation. But I remember my last thought in that was like, what does make a good candidate for a board? So what do you look for?
If I would start out the conversation, I think it's really important that a board member, first of all, don't have an agenda. I think the hardest thing is when they come with an agenda of like, well, when I get on the board, I'm going to change, or I'm going to change persons, or I don't like that staff member and I really want them to leave, so I'm going to get on the board to make sure that they leave, or I'm going to get on the board to say no. I mean, I've had board members actually be honest enough to say, well, I can't wait to get on the board because I'm going to vote no to whatever Ed thinks and whatever he would like to do. That's just real. That was one of the churches that I served at, is that there was actually a whole movement within the church, a segment of the church that they were saying, let's all get on the board so that whatever Ed brings to the table, we can vote no. That was an agenda. And sometimes God has a sense of humor that this actually happened. So all these people got on the board, and they had the majority on the board. And then actually, God called me to a different church. So their first board meeting, I wasn't in attendance for.
They didn't have a topic then.
And they didn't know what to do because they got on the board to vote no, and I was no longer there. And so now the church said, okay, you got on the board. You wanted to be on the board. Okay, you're in charge. What are you going to do? And they didn't know what to do because they came to vote no.
So no agenda.
No agenda. Yeah, I think somebody who's got a heart for the Lord. I mean, just really a discerning heart that just is in the scriptures, active in worship, ideally active in the church and involved in the church in different things. And I think it's really great from my perspective as a pastor that they have a relationship with me. You know, that it's just, it's more than just, I see you on Sunday morning, I listen to you preach, but actually have a relationship.
So now, like when you have a board, I think some of the conversation we were having offline before jumping into this was, if you have a really solid board, you can both have like the resistance with the board and you can have full support. And there's this tension that you're playing back and forth with different decisions that are made. So I think we want to give listeners tools for both talking to people who are board members, who are leaders in the church, and to the pastor, because you could come with an idea as a pastor and be 100% convinced that like God has given the church this invitation to do this thing, while at the same time, the board could have like 100% convincing that like God does not want us to do this thing. So how do you reach common ground in that space?
Are you asking me or Bridget?
Both. I guess I was looking at you, but I think I want to hear from both of you.
I think that you have to, one, come open-minded, not with an agenda. Like you already going, I'm not doing another thing. I'm not voting yes on another thing. But you also have to know that it might not get resolved in that one board meeting. Be open to all the conversation and let it go on to another one, whether it's a one inserted in between, and you don't want to wait that month. But don't expect it if it's a big decision. Listen to everybody, but don't expect it to be resolved in that one time frame. Don't put a time limit on it.
Bridget, do you think some board members have that mindset of like coming to a board like, I'm not going to vote yes?
I do, and to some points, if the agenda has some things on, because you'd get an agenda of what we were going to go over. So if there was something on there that they reviewed without already listening to, I think some in their minds probably did already like knock it off. Like, oh, well, that'll be a short topic.
So if we would give an example of this, I know there's some things that I have brought to the board in the past and just said, hey, I'm thinking about. Do board members kind of on the side kind of talk about that? Like, we don't know if this is a good idea, and then come into a next meeting skewed?
Most of the conversations would have been after a meeting. Like, okay, we even like suggestions of how could we approach that next time. Not necessarily a prior to. No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Lyndsay, we haven't heard from you yet. I kind of want to hear from you. So you're not a board member.
Yeah.
And you're not the pastor who's leading. What's it like being a staff member and some of these decisions that you hear are happening at the board level?
I mean, I have questions. And that's one of those things where it's like we've talked about, the board is removed, like they're not part of staff every single day or 5 days a week, 6 days a week. It's like they're there once a month to have these meetings. And so there's a lot that they don't see. But I think I also sit in that chair of like, I don't know what the board talks about. I don't know what they see. I don't know what how conversations are being had. And so I'm only hearing this in like follow-ups or, this is what the board talked about last night. And I'm just like, how was that approached? Like, were they given an agenda beforehand? I didn't know that. Did they have sidebar conversations? And so I think there are a couple different perspectives that I'm imagining or thinking through here. One being like, they're not a part of the things that are happening every single day. And so it's like, you need to learn the full story. I think that's a huge part of it, is like wanting a board to be objective. We talked last week of like discouraging, encouraging, whether someone is positive or like, are they really pessimistic in nature? Right. And I don't think you want either on your board, really. Like, I think if your head's in the clouds, you're not going to be like grounded to some of the realities that come when you are doing really practical things in ministry and serving your community. If you're really pessimistic, you'll never be on board with the dream and you'll be resentful for when it happens. Right. But when you are someone on the board who is objective and can look at information and play devil's advocate, not because you're trying to poke holes or be pessimistic about it, but you can gather information and be okay with like having a couple meetings about it, leaving no stone unturned, like really investigating, learning. I think that's when some of the best decisions probably can be made, and people who can have like productive conversations. But there are some times that I hear in hindsight these meetings happening, it's like, it's really tense. I'm like, how did it get to that point? Like, what's happening? So I don't know if I answered that question.
It gets to the point because Ed gets up and gets the whiteboard out and the markers out, which is good because you get more explanation. But sometimes I think sometimes your explanation of things are so extreme that we still can't grasp it. And again, it's not a long enough meeting.
That's fair.
It is. It's like it's a lot thrown at you, and for once a month, it's just like, oh my goodness. But you've had all this time to think about it or let it go through. So sometimes I do think that it just needs more time.
So is there a surprise now that you're on staff of what you see on a daily and a weekly basis versus what you saw once a month?
I think I think that I have a little more know on the inside that you go, oh, well, that would have been nice being on the board if we would have had a little heads up on that prior, and I can see how the board wouldn't have known till the board meeting type because staff meets every week. And I think that's a wonderful thing to touch base with all of them. But if the board is only meeting once a week, they're not going to know what happened in 3 weeks. I mean, there's a lot that can happen in 3 weeks, from somebody stepping down, somebody stepping up, something getting changed, something being needed, a truck being used for transportation. It's all kinds of things that can be thrown in there that then they can't get upset with and have the mindset of, he's bringing all this to us. Well, that's your only time frame. When else are you supposed to bring it?
So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit here. So
Okay.
when you have a dream, and it's either your dream or, Bridget, I'm going to say your dream as
Okay.
a board member. The two questions I have, and I don't know who wants to go first, but it's like, what happens when the pastor is resistant and the board is like, we really need to do this thing, which you've probably never experienced because he's
I
pretty
can't
on
think
board
of
with everything.
anything that while I was on there that was like, oh, let's do it.
But it's like, then maybe how would you encourage that person? Like, does the pastor need to be involved? I mean, I think of one of our listeners who's on their board, and they're like, I think he's on the board. He's like, we're ready to go. Like, we really want to do this missionally, but the pastor is not on board. What needs to happen there?
No, actually, though,
ahead.
if you don't mind,
No, go ahead.
Ed has always said to all of us, if you have something, I'm always willing to come alongside you, but you have to bring it to me. Like, so he's open to it. It might need more discussion. He doesn't just shut it down, but you have to bring it to him. So I think that it would be more open, but.
I think I'm a pretty open person. Just come with an idea. Tell me the what. Tell me the why. Let me ask a lot of questions. Why should we do that? How are we going to do it? What's the answer for it? What's the solution for it?
So what would you say to, like, this board member, not our board, not somebody at Messiah, because it's a little bit different, but this person who in their church, they're trying, their leadership is ready to go, but not the pastor?
Yeah, well, there's some ideas that come along that I think people have that are maybe good ideas. I mean, it's just a heartfelt fact of sometimes I'm just not sold out, or I'm not excited about what somebody will bring as an idea. And then you find, how can I encourage them to do it? Unless I really think it's a bad idea for the church. Then that's hard. It's hard because you don't want to take the heart out of somebody, but just, I'm not sure this fits in here really well, or that we should be doing this.
Well, and I don't know that said person bring it has all the necessary details and works to work through. I mean, it could be something that sounds simple to them, like, why aren't we doing this? But there's so many extra things that come to make it happen. So the questions of how and whys, and, hopefully make them think again. But hopefully that pastor is asking said person all those good questions.
I mean, what if the pastor is not asking that and, like, still objectively saying, like, nope, like, this is not a good idea? Like, maybe what would you say to that pastor?
I would say at least listen and hear it out. I tell people, you may not ever agree with me, but at least you're going to understand the why. So, like, let's just say, Bridget, if you were a board member still and you brought an idea to me and I listened, and maybe I don't agree with it. Maybe I don't think it's a good idea, but you're going to leave with why.
Right.
Why does this not fit? Why is this not a good idea? And you can walk away and go, I completely disagree. I think we ought to do it. But at least you'll know why we're not going to do it. That's not really unusual. I mean, we had a meeting just a couple of days ago, and one of our elders brought up something that they really thought ought to be done. And I said, all right, so let's start there. This is something that you really think ought to be done. All right. Are you aware of, do you know this is going on? Do you know this is going on? Do you know this is where finances? I mean, I just unpacked it all to say, now that you know all of this, do you still feel the same way? And they said, no, I don't. I feel differently now. Okay, good. Because, we think something is the right decision till we learn a whole lot more. And then you realize, oh, got it. Now, so I think somebody who comes to a pastor, first of all, you got to give them all the information. But why? I mean, maybe it's something that God is tapping on that we need to go explore further.
So how about, roles reversed, if you as a pastor have a dream and you're encountering a resistant board, what do you do?
I think that's sometimes harder for me. It depends on what it is. It depends on if I think it really matters. Because there's some decisions, I think I mentioned it, last week, that there's sometimes a board just wants to vote no. They want to make sure that they still have the authority to vote no on something. And so if they vote no on something, if it's one of those, okay, all right, you voted no, we won't do it. Okay, let's move on. I think it's harder when it's something that I think really matters.
Yeah.
Then I'll just take the time to say, unpack it all. Why is that a no? Why are you really resistant? What's behind it? What's the fear? What's the concerns? What are you hearing? And then usually I just say, can we just sit on this for a month? And can we maybe look at it again next month? Let me go find more information. You all go find out more information. Let's come back a month from now and see if we're in the same place or if we've changed.
Do you find that when that is the approach, I know that you would go find information. Does your board?
Sometimes. But sometimes they'll go to just maybe a source and come in because they saw one article on something. But that's not the basis to make a decision. There's got to be more than that. So yeah, I'm going to really go deep. And I'm going to learn everything I can learn about it. And if you still have a board that's resistant, that's when it gets hard.
Yeah. And like, how do you know that at that point, then it's just like, what if it's a bad idea, but it's like, you're 100% convinced that it needs to happen? Or, it's like just recognizing too, that people are flawed. And like, that's the whole point of having multiple people giving counsel, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think you gotta ask the question, why? Why are you so resistant to this? What's behind it?
You have to be open-minded. You can't just already, like you said, with your no's or your yeses, already come in knowing if somebody has questions, listen to them. Don't just shut it off. Don't just go blank and go, well, my thought was already done. Just really listen.
Me.
Yeah.
Show me why it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the reason behind it? What am I missing? But Lyndsay, there are times, I've served with boards that sometimes there's just boards that are like, you just know based on month after month after month that the board is not going to be very open to doing something. And so you just, as a pastor, I think you just kind of settle down and say, we're probably not in this season, which might be a year, it might be 2 years, that we're not going to do anything new. Okay, so let's put everything we got into what we currently have. And I'm always bringing new ideas. But if I have a board that's like, no ideas are really welcome at this point, okay, wait it out.
So what about, like, kind of switching to just a more happy note, is like, what about when you have like an amazing board? Like, what can be accomplished when pastor and board are running at the same pace of like what could be?
Nothing's impossible.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you get the bridge, you get the gateway, you get the help,
it.
and it's
The hardest things we've ever done, but you've got to have a board. I know that for me, I feel like the board and the elders are almost like a platform that I'm standing on. And what I mean by that is I feel I can do so much more knowing that I have their backing. That I feel like I have the confidence to go. I have the confidence to go to these meetings and say, we can do this. Let's take a step of faith. But if I don't feel like I have the board or the elders that are supportive, it causes me to like falter. Like I don't have that confidence. And now it's almost, I'm afraid to move forward.
What was it like for you, Bridget, being on the board for 2 years? Like you said a little bit last week of like at first hearing these kinds of ideas, you were like, wait, we're doing what? And then eventually to then hear something like, we have $105 million dream, you leaned in and was like, tell me more. So what did you learn within those 2 years?
I think that it was being more active in all the ministries and looking more into it myself, and loving more in the church to where you just want more. The more the more you have that relationship with God and you can see that trusting and see where he's leading you. And when you're quiet and going to listen to where he's leading you, it just opens your mind more. So you're not closed mind. I think that's just a big thing, to just be open minded, but so be involved. That you just want the church to grow. You want more people to grow. You want more ministries to grow. It's just like this feeling inside you that you just go, oh, I can't stop it. You know? And it's just, it's encouraging, but it's also so exciting, you know? And then when you get to see how it's impacted the people, whether it's through your newsletter or going there yourself or having a person that you ran into that got to use one of those ministries, it's a feeling of, we did right. We're doing right. We're going to continue to do right. And then you just pray for the next thing that God leads you in the same way. And if not, and he opens and shuts your doors, that you're paying attention. And don't just pay attention by yourself. Pay attention to the surroundings. You know, listen to what the others have to say, but also don't be afraid to speak what your concerns are so that you're not negative. Because I think once you have a concern that you didn't voice and you let it eat at you, you leave and you leave it worse. You know, because now you're hindering a thing that could happen, and you're probably gonna hinder it for somebody else who might reach out to you because you didn't focus or get that answer. You didn't go and get that one thing that was bothering you that could have been something simple or something major. To say, oh, well, if I would have known that, and I think that was part of going on the board, not knowing how it worked, but then seeing how it worked was just like, oh. That's how these are possible. You know, just the same as when the finances weren't the best, and being on the board and realizing, wow, it takes a lot to run a church. You know, you don't see that as a congregation person. You're like, lights are on, the heat's working.
Yeah, like where is all this money
exactly
going? Where does it go?
So I think it's just knowing. Don't not know. Don't not question.
I think that's important in any role that you're in, whether it's board, elders, pastor, staff, is to like be curious. I feel like there was like something in me that like flipped when we went to Phoenix for best practices. Is just I don't know what it was about that specific time, other than it just felt like every single place that we went, there was like a curiosity of like, why are we talking to this person? Why did we get derailed from going to this session and sitting with these people and talking? Why did we go hiking and climb this thing and everything's a parallel to leadership? And like just being able to really like question everything, it made me kind of view all things with like a curiosity and like almost just like being a detective of like, I have to know why we're going to this place or meeting with this person, or why I saw that person on the side of the road with their hood up. And like, I remember the day we got back from Phoenix, there was someone in the parking lot, and I probably actually would have just gone to my parking spot and walked inside the church. But there was just something where I'm like, I have to know why that person is stuck there. And she was like frantic and her hood had popped open and she couldn't get it closed. And so just got to like go close it for her. And it's like, I don't know. And so I think that if you can approach that, like we said, without an agenda, approach every single meeting like that, of a curiosity of like, I have to know more.
And want to know more.
I think let's talk about what kinds of things, though, because what keeps coming back to me is so much of what I bring to the board is how we're going to reach one more person. How are we going to help one more person get to heaven? We're not talking about, should we paint something blue or green, and like it really matters, and there's a fight over what it is that we're going to do, or we're going to build something in the church. Does that happen in
some churches?
Oh, of course. Yeah, you'd be, especially, I'll tell you what, if you want to see real fights, who gets to decide the color of the carpeting? That's sometimes the biggest fight in the church, is who gets to decide that. And then everybody has an opinion about it, and it just doesn't go well. And that's coming for us, because we're going to be changing our carpeting. But
red shag carpet, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think when you talk about how do we reach one more life with Christ, how do we do that? I mean, and I'll give you an example of something that I think is going to be a battle. It'll be a battle at the board level. It's going to be a battle with a lot of opinions. Is that, young adult ministry, which is now launched and is going, and a long-term dream is to, part of that $105 million is to open up a coffee house / pub with beer and wine. And as soon as I've said that,
Bridget deeply inhales.
everybody lines up on both sides
Yeah.
right away. Some are
Right.
like, can God use a pub and a coffee house with a really Christ-centered culture in this place, because we would get to determine the culture? Can he use something like a beverage to help another person come to Christ? Is that an avenue? And then you have others who are like, absolutely, that is wrong. The church shouldn't be in the beer and wine business. So that would be an example that is coming, but if we're just going to open up a coffee house because we want to use it as an avenue to reach more people with Christ, most people would be like, great, okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's no controversy with opening up a coffee house except for finances and all the other kinds of things. So
Yeah.
that's going to be an example. That's coming.
Mm-hmm. I like that that's a question that like boards are having to meet about. It are things like to discuss how we can reach more people versus like what color do we need to paint something. Like
Yeah.
that's exciting to me that we do get to have those conversations, whether they be really challenging and you have people on both ends that are arguing about it, or everybody's on one side and excited about it. I don't know. It's just cool that we get to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a uniqueness for us because I think there's so many different things that we're in that I think we're dealing with real life issues for people.
Mm-hmm.
How does this change a life? How does this impact a life? How does it reach one more person with Christ? And if it doesn't, we don't participate much in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess like what do you feel would be valuable for listeners to know about this topic of conversation with a board and pastors and that whole dynamic?
I think I'd like to go a little bit, and Bridget, maybe you can speak to this. I mean, what do you do when a pastor just doesn't really want to lead the church beyond the breakwater, but the board does?
I mean, we kind of asked that earlier, but I feel like for Bridget, I don't know if you do have a response, but it's like, I feel like that's tough because you've always been a pastor that has.
I haven't had that experience.
So, okay, so
So-
hypothetically, let's just say that I was completely resistant to...
Doesn't the board have the right to vote you off?
Well, that was easy.
We would probably get with the elders. Do they have the right to vote?
There you go.
You
Get
know?
rid of the pastor. But no,
But I
maybe
guess
there's a
it would
truth
be-
to that.
It would be that we would, hopefully the board's strong enough to be like bringing that to said pastor's attention. But if he's not open to it, how can he grow? How is he going to grow his own church, let alone anything else? So I would think he would not be pastoring.
Well, I think you'd
You
be
would think,
surprised
yeah.
at how many pastors are petrified to try something new, to go beyond the breakwater, to reach another person with Christ. That really what they
Well,
want
doesn't
is...
that shut their church down eventually? If you're not going to move with times, go with new things, and open your door and your hearts to other things, isn't that slowly but surely killing the church anyhow that you're in?
Have you listened to any episode? Just kidding.
No.
No, she said this.
I mean, we're both laughing because you're right. That's
Yes.
exactly it.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
the whole purpose for the podcast. Because how do we get pastors and how do we get churches to go beyond the breakwater? Because if they're not doing that, I think you said it perfectly. They're going to close.
Yeah.
But I think you just brought up another thing. What do you do with a pastor who he has no interest? And I'll tell you what, I can name them, which I won't do, but I can name them that have no interest in taking the church beyond the breakwater, that I have coached their boards, that they've asked my opinion. And I said, you need to have an honest heart-to-heart
Yeah.
with your pastor and say, either you need to lead us beyond or you got to leave.
Well, and I can't imagine why said pastor wouldn't want to if he has all this behind him. If he has support and he has the willingness, why would you not want to open those
Fear.
doors? Well,
Pure
you're
fear.
supposed to not, pastors shouldn't have that much fear.
Bridget, you should be on here more.
Bridget, I
She'll
love
tell
the
it to you
honesty.
straight.
You're right. You're
Well, just
absolutely
don't
right.
have it,
Just-
okay?
just don't have fear. You-
So what is a pastor supposed to do when he really wants to take a church beyond the breakwater and the board doesn't want to?
Well, then I would say that board probably needs to grow a little bit because they're not seeing I mean, if you love your church and you want it to grow and you're a part of it, you're not shutting the doors on people that are new and wanting to come in or new ideas. You're supposed to be open to it. So if you're on the board, that should be in your mindset in the first place. It shouldn't be just, what am I doing to help said church right now? What we have inside, what we're doing now, not outside. Your mind has to be open, bigger and more than that.
So what would you do with a pastor who just wants to sit in his office all week long?
I would be really sad if I was able to transfer all the calls to you. I would.
You would have nothing to do.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and why would you want a pastor that just said, he's not doing anything? He's not growing not only the church, but he's not growing the outside to bring them in. Nobody knows said pastor except for when they're on at the podium. I couldn't think of the word, but to say a message. But who you speaking to if you're in an office?
Bridget, you're being really honest right now, and there's a lot of pastors who are not liking what you're saying. So what would you say to them?
Get out of your office.
No, thank you. This is the honesty. This is what pastors are doing. They're hanging out in their offices.
No, I can see, like, you need to be present in the church. You need to show yourself in the church. You need to be knowing what's going on in the church. So, like, from our aspect of our church, I know that you know what's going on in it. I think it's great that Matt heads up the insides a lot. He's awesome. Dennis does the care stuff. Awesome. You know, you guys all have your own little roles. None of you can sit at a desk. Steve doesn't have a calendar. We'll bring that into this in case he's listening. He can't sit at his office. Who's he reaching? I wouldn't get that.
What if you're a one-man rodeo? What if you just
You
listed
should have
a
an
bunch of
awesome
people?
secretary answering your calls in the office so that she can take a message and relay them or help said person find what they need until you're available.
Could you utilize your congregation to do some of the things that maybe they don't have staff to do?
Yes.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, I used to have volunteer staff.
Yes. And you should.
I mean, we do.
Yeah.
We still have somebody now. I mean, Paul is a volunteer staff member. So you
just
can always
goes-
raise up people to be members of the staff, whether they get paid
Right.
or not.
And it just goes to show that you shouldn't just attend a church to sit there on Sunday. You should attend to be involved. Attend to help where you want to help. There are so many avenues that need help, and they think, oh, look at all these people sitting here. They're not all helping. They're not all involved. They're not all with that mindset of I can.
So if a pastor really doesn't want to and is really content sitting in his office, not doing
Probably
anything
should
else.
look for another job.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no.
Not a different pastor job,
No.
another job.
In my opinion, yes.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so there are times that boards and elders maybe need to go to their pastor and say, you got to go.
You need to step down, and they should be able to legit tell them why. If they've came to him because they should have already came to him and said, listen, you're slacking in this, we're losing this, we need you to do this. So he would have had ample warning and time to work and have people come alongside him. If he's not, who's he growing? He's not bringing anybody to Jesus as, you know, we're reaching one more person. He's closing the door already. So why would you want him in your building?
So do you think in the same way, if a board is really opposed and really resistant and they don't want to do anything beyond the breakwater, do you feel the same way about a pastor who's like, they're just never going to do it, I need to go somewhere else?
Possibly, if his heart is that big.
I
But
mean,
why wouldn't you say we need to mix up the board a little bit and get some new fresh thoughts in here?
Okay, so you're suggesting to the pastor that maybe he needs a different board if they're that resistant, but if nothing's changing.
If nothing's changing at all and he's like tried and that's his heart, then he needs to go to another church. That's going to
Okay.
let him grow.
Because actually a few podcasts ago when we talked about the 5 stages of a church, you know, when they get to preservation, they're looking past, they're holding on for dear life, and sometimes a pastor can't do anything because the church won't let them because they're holding on to the past so dearly. And sometimes they got to go too.
In the model, what role does the board play in that? Like, are they in the harbor, like gathering resources for people to go out beyond the breakwater? Like, where are they at in the model?
Well, I really like to see the board theoretically is being beyond the breakwater with us.
Okay.
that the things that we're doing, that they're at least aware or have visited. That's my personal frustration sometimes with the board and elders, even at Messiah, that, we have these amazing community ministries. They should be at least in the know and have visited all of them. They should meet the managers and know the managers to be able to intelligently say, these are all the people that are serving.
Yeah.
And so sometimes even me, I get frustrated because it's just like, you have this amazing church with amazing ministries, and you've never been there? And you've been on the board how long? And you've never once showed up to volunteer or just meander in and say, hey, I just want to meet everybody who's serving out here. So sometimes that's hard for me too.
Yeah. And I think even just expressing that too, like I just was thinking, like, we've had listeners ask us specifically about how do you deal with all of these dynamics of how do you move missionally into your community if you have a resistant pastor or if you have a resistant board. And I don't think we have the magic solution to this. It's like, these are things that you are still dealing with, the dynamics that you're still struggling with. We have not found like this is the key. Like I think because people are flawed. I think God speaks to people differently. We all have different authentic stories and fears and experiences, maybe of even going beyond the breakwater and doing something missionally over and over and over again to now where you have the confidence in it, or maybe you've never gone before and you do have confidence in it, or maybe you've never gone and you're fearful of going. Like there are all of these different things at play in every single person individually. And so I think all that to say, this was just an interesting conversation to like hopefully offer some solution, just some things to think about as you are having these conversations and moving beyond the breakwater. Is the conversations are going to be hard. But I think if my takeaway from this is like, come with an open agenda, like both pastor and board member. Don't have a decision made already in your mind. Don't think that you are going to walk into the meeting to convince said person to be on board with your mission. Like you had mentioned, I actually don't know if you mentioned this on the podcast or if this was off air, but you had said like you will bring something to the board and say, this is something I'm thinking about. Can you think about it with me? Same with as you're bringing that to the board, rather than talking amongst yourselves on the sidelines and having, okay, we need to convince him otherwise. Come and be curious and learn and voice opinions and get to the bottom of whatever it is that is being discussed. Don't be afraid to voice what you're voicing because like you all come with very different experiences. So,
but hopefully they're all ultimately coming for the same purpose.
Yeah. Which is
growing and bringing one more to God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation.
It's been really good.
That last part was super fun. Bridget, you're amazing. I love hearing how straightforward you are. And it was awesome.
I think you might see some of that on TikTok.
I don't follow TikTok, so I won't ever see it.
Well, is there anything else that you guys want to share before we go?
I don't think I can share enough with churches and boards to realize how much negative pastors hear. And they really need their boards to come alongside them to just give them an encouraging word along the way. Because they don't hear it. They'll hear 20 people, 30 people who have something bad or negative or what they should do, could do, better did. Why didn't they, could have, And so I think the leaders of a church, if they would just take to heart, just be intentional along the way and just encourage their pastor. Because if they're not, he or she will never become what they can be. But with a supportive board, a supportive group of elders, or a supportive council, depending on your polity, you're giving the leadership of the church, the pastor, and the board, the best chance to accomplish what God is calling them to do.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.